but my point is like, okay, so, and anyone that tells you that learning English is easy, it's a lie. So, right? Does anyone actually think that was easy to do? Yeah, no, okay. So yeah, today I want to talk about how using AI can actually really level the playing field, especially in a global context, and because so many of us are ESL speakers. And I'll do a more proper intro, but I figured I could do that through a little bit of storytelling. So just to give you some context on me and also why I care so much about this topic, my first language is actually, I was very heartwarmed to see that actually I had no idea Haiko you are Korean or like have some Korean origins. But my first language is actually Korean. I was born and raised in South Korea, in Seoul. And then my second language was actually Japanese because my grandmother spoke Japanese better than Korean after she started to age. Just hold it?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. And then it really wasn't until like, let's say middle school that I had to start learning English. And by the way, I also had to learn Chinese. So it was a really crazy time, as you might imagine, trying to juggle all these languages. And when you go to school, like, it's not like you learn English in the context that people actually use English, right? You're like, learning, hey, I want to go to the discotheque. And then you go to America and you're like, hey guys, I want to go to the discotheque. No, no one says this, right? And then like English in a business context is also a completely different world, right? And so like, how many of you, when you were learning and using English, kind of like struggled when you had to use business English first? Let's see, any show? All right, thank you, Arthur, fellow speaker. What was the most nerve-wracking part of, and what's your first language?
It's Ukrainian.
Okay.
So my challenge was basically the words mean different things.
Oh, for example, can you give me an example?
When you're having like regular English conversation and when you're having a business conversation.
Yes.
Like the same word can mean different things.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and I'll come back to that in a bit. So at the ripe age of 16, I had the privilege of joining IBM Research. This is what I spent the first 8 years of my life on, by the way. And I helped build, one of my first projects was I focused on natural language processing, which like, by the way, in this time, it looked like mainframe. I used really cutting edge languages like Fortran and SQL and yeah, CSVs. But anyway, so I worked on this thing for 8 years, and this was my first exposure to business English, was research at IBM. And besides the fact that I was really young, it was also really difficult, like from multiple perspectives, right? Does anyone actually still remember this, by the way? Now I'm like dating myself. Yeah, Rahul! Okay, I see like 2 people raise their hands. So I left, this was basically like the AlphaGo back in the day, being 2011, which shows you how much things have changed in basically a decade. And so this was like the first time that a question answering system on National Public TV kind of like beat a human who was Ken Jennings, and he was like the most winningest person at Jeopardy until this date. And I left shortly after this aired. This was like my big project, and then I left. But the point of sharing all of that was when I first entered kind of like the workforce and research in particular. So again, there's like business English, and then there's research English, right? These are all like all of the difficulties hitting at once. But I found this really fascinating publication in Nature that was actually just published last year in 2023. And it talks really in depth about the cost of science and what we're losing from like a language perspective. And I'm also excited that you're going to talk about languages. So this was not coordinated, by the way. But one of the findings of this study was actually that just, again, not even thinking about the writing, I'll get to that in just a minute, But in general, if you're an English as a second language speaker, people automatically perceive you as less intelligent, less believable, and less successful. So I know, not a surprise for those of you who felt it, but now we have more evidence. That's the difference. And so, like, to summarize my time and like why it's so important is, you think about it, like the way that we are applying language in so many important aspects of our life, even like today, right? Now, you know, the IBM times are long gone. Now we've moved on. I no longer have this crazy, it's like slightly terrible, but like I don't have as bad of an accent anymore. But like, in whether you're doing research, writing an email, or like filing a health insurance claim, all of these things, you are more likely to be denied as an ESL speaker, by the way. But I want to talk about how AI can help and how I've been using it. But let's get into that. So where are the biggest losses of time? Well, let's talk about research. So in research, we actually thought that we kind of like had it somewhat solved for with this thing called the blind review. We're like, okay, we're going to mitigate like 70% of bias through blind reviews. And the idea of a blind review, does anyone work in research? And yeah, a lot of you, I'm sure a lot of people do, yeah. The idea behind the blind review isn't new, and actually orchestras were the first to do this in 1970. So definitely not a new idea. But what they saw after 15 years of implementation was actually that so they included what's called a blind audition, where like the reviewers couldn't see the musician. And suddenly there were 30% more women, new hires in orchestras, right? And so clearly it had nothing to do with anything else, but like it wasn't their musicality, right? Now, in AI research and in the scientific research areas, there's other problems, like we have pipeline problems, et cetera. But let's talk about blind reviews. So in 2017, we started to implement the blind review process. And essentially, we thought this would mitigate a lot of bias because, well, in the single blind reviews, like you don't necessarily know who the reviewers are. And we're like, well, if they don't know, then reviewers can be free to judge freely or like, give constructive feedback. But of course, there's like prestige bias and all these other things, right? And actually, the study from 2023 shows that you don't have as much of an impact with single blind review. Now, in double blind review, neither party knows who the other is, right? And so you're like, okay, I as an author don't know who you are. You as a reviewer don't know who I am. Surely this mitigates a ton of bias. But the problem is, so what this paper also talks about is actually that in writing, that this doesn't help at all. And so actually, if you're from an Asian country, there's a much higher likelihood that you're going to be rejected than other like foreign language speakers, so India, China, et cetera. And so, because at the end of the day, like people can still see your writing. And this has definitely been the case like for me as well, where I've gotten interesting feedback on like grammatical things versus like the idea itself, right? And so the other key fact from this research that I wanted to share is that actually like non-native English speakers are 2.5 times more likely to have their paper rejected than others, right? They did a post study and actually like the more that you have English native speakers review the papers, the statistic actually improves. So where is the time going? And this is where I really want to get to kind of the key point of this short talk is not only are you getting more rejected because of language bias, but all leading up to a research paper, and if this happens in research, I guarantee it's happening in your business emails, everything else that you're writing. But if this is happening again, like you're getting rejected just based on language for your paper, you're also, by the way, having to spend a lot more time revising your paper. It's like 12.5 times more than normal. In addition to that, you're probably either spending money or asking favors from your native English-speaking friends to review your papers or work. And I think they say it's like 75% of the time. And so all of this is adding up on the time that, as Rahul was saying earlier, that you could be spending on working on your actual ideas, on spending time with your family, your dog if you have one, etc., right? Okay, so let's talk about how you can use AI and how I've been using AI personally. So one is, of course, the content at the end of the day generally needs to come from you, right? Especially in the research context, it definitely needs to come from you. I don't recommend generating your entire paper from it, right? But in general, let's say you have content that you want to share, have AI as like Claude, ChatGPT, pick your preference, right? But use AI as kind of like your easy access English expert and have it edit your papers, right? Or like edit your email. Like we don't have to angst over the same thing like as much as we do, right? Like I don't need to rewrite my email 10 times to get it right. And the thing is, like, and of course, there's specific prompts and things you can do to get a better outcome, but like, it's a pretty affordable way to have access to an English expert. I would guess, actually, how many of you are like using AI already to do like business emails and things like that? Yeah, right. And even for native speakers, do you find this useful? Like, yeah, right? Yeah. And so imagine for us, it takes like twice as long, maybe I'm always like, do I really want to send this to the executive? Oh, hold on, let me edit this, right? Way easier. Yeah.
Question. So
Yeah.
I'm born in the US, so native, I guess. But like,
Absolutely.
What will your take beyond like not having your own voice?
Well, okay. So I think that's also interesting. So you mean having it not adopt your style of writing or like what you want to communicate?
Yeah, I feel like a subtle thing that people go on is like authenticities, and they try to find like whether you're like some snowflake or not. So I feel like the ChatGPT, if everyone just sort of sound the same, like people are saying like ChatGPT even like uses certain keywords all the time, so you kind of like sort of pick that out. Like, what would your take? Because I feel like for me, it's like based on like culture where I grew up, so where I find that voice thing. So what is your thoughts?
So I rarely use the generated outputs as like the gold standard. Like I always edit them myself after to some extent. And then also the content I put in is my own content. But the second thing I would point out also is that now through prompt engineering, you can also give it a lot of different examples of your style of voice that you want it to have. And then you can actually have it generate content in your personalized voice. So that's like, again, this is all like really, that's a great question. And that's also where it can be super powerful is it can talk more like me. And just briefly to start wrapping up, so you can really start to focus on other areas and also like actually drive better outcomes. I actually had ChatGPT generate a health insurance claim response for me, and I actually had that, it was disproved and then it was approved. So in conclusion, I think let's start to use AI tools. I'd love to talk to you all about different questions or ideas, but really it would be wonderful if we could just focus on our ideas and not syntax. Thanks for your time.
We have time for maybe one question, but now it's very clear to me why I did invite Mishra, because for her it's not English as a second language, or maybe the fifth language or fourth language. So she's got plenty of experience, and thank you for coming. So maybe time for questions.
Yeah, sure.
Would you also just be able to repeat the questions when they ask you?
Great. Yeah. Does anyone else have another question, or would you like to? I saw in the back first, and then I saw up front here.
I'm not sure if it's relevant, but how do you get rid of your accent?
I would love for an AI tool to do this for me, by the way. The question was, this may not be exactly relevant as the talk, but how do you get rid of your accent? And I definitely could see, I was just talking with Tiffany about voice assistants. I would love to see a next development, maybe funded by Heiko, around something that helps people learn languages as a native, right? And getting feedback that way. So at the time, I did not have AI tooling to help me. So this was just, I guess I would answer with a lot of persistence and a lot of tears. Suffering. Yeah, literally crying, oh my, and angst. Really? You've also heard this feedback?
My question related. You tell me when
Yeah,
we're
no, yeah. Jump
So
off
I
of
would
it.
say I think Anglocentrism is going to turn a corner in the next 5 years. Like the age is ending, you can already like smell it. So what I was going to ask you, as a very multilingual person, like how do you feel about like wordplay, like across languages and stuff? Like why not drop like Chinese words in your emails?
I love the idea. Hold on, wait. I love this idea. Hang on. I'm thinking. I'm not dismissing. I'm
Absolutely. In fact,
like,
with the global language becoming English, it's more about prerogative to preserve other languages, because otherwise we'll all be reduced to like the words ChatGPT uses.
You're right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Delving.
Yeah.
All right. I like the idea. I hope you are right. Then, I mean, I would be sad in a way because I have so much sunk cost in learn. But yeah,
Awesome.
I think we have to go.
Thank you so much.
Happy to chat after
Yeah.
during the breakouts.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Arthur, who's going to talk about some of the awesome research they've been doing on fine-tuning LLMs to protect or their discoveries in underrepresented languages with LLMs. So.
All right.